Our next speakers who are Adrian, Steele, and Aplin from Hotch, Potch Organics across the border in England. Guys, the floor is yours.
So apologies for being in England, but we are on some quite decent land in the Vale of Evesham in Worcestershire. I work for the Soil Association now, as well as being a farmer. And the farm itself, the business I built up is around 500 hectares, and was very much modelled upon organic principles of rotational fertility building lays grazed by livestock, and then with the fertility being utilised through growing cereal crops, the kind of broad acres type approach. And like many other farmers, we went for economies of scale, encouraged by the BPS system, which really channeled you into sort of specialisation. However, I was always aware that we had land which was suitable for growing food more directly, and certainly for vegetable production. And so I did for a while attempt to grow potatoes and leeks for the supermarkets, and our potatoes were the first ones into organic potatoes into Sainsbury's, for instance, about 20 years ago. But what I very rapidly discovered was that working in an environment with the supermarkets, there was only one person who's going to lose when times got tough, and that was me. And we ended up not being able to lift potatoes because the pack house wanted to process their ones from Belgium, for instance, even though obviously all the implications around that were just ludicrous. And when we started growing leeks, we found that because the area was a lot of intensive salad onion production going on around us, that the air was full of thrips. So we actually had thrips moving into the leeks and making them again not some of the supermarkets wanted to look at because they weren't cosmetically perfect. So I sort of dropped away from looking at growing vegetables, even though we had some good land. And then really by chance, I came across Jim and Hayley, who had been growing organically over in Winchcombe, a few miles away from us, and also really committed to organic principles in the way that we were, and recognizing the limitations of growing vegetables on a set area. So we came up with a model whereby Jim was able to utilize the fertility building aspect of our rotation. So after 2 or 3 years of clover and trefoil, we took the ground out of going that, so that the fertility was there for Jim to utilize, but also to free him up from perennial weeds, because obviously we had a sufficient area for Jim to move around from one field to another, to avoid the problems you get from growing in the same place for a long period of time. And then the third, obviously, was disease pressure by growing in a system where actually there's only cereal crops and grassland, meant that there wasn't the disease pressure that you get over time from being in the same place. So obviously it worked really well for organic production. And from my purposes, it's really, really amazing to see the diversity of what could be grown on our ground. And also the attention to detail that Jim was able to bring to the job, demonstrated the wide range of products that could be grown, but also how important it was that he was connecting up to local community in a way that my business, although I sell to Shipton Mill and Dove's Farm and to organic local brands in that sense, could never really do in the way that I was working it, and also in the absence of local abattoirs in terms of meat production. So really, I think we went into this arrangement on the basis of shared values, and I think with organic, obviously you have that, and there obviously, in a sense, there are greater risks because there's an inspection process which had to be harmonised. At the same time,
went in land for 5 years. You can't even get organically certified for 3 years.
Hello? Sorry? Was that a question?
Can you please, no, it wasn't, I think it was a crossover. Can you please make sure that you are muted? Jackie.
Sorry. Apologies.
Okay. So we were able to sort of harmonise certification and come to an arrangement around that on the basis of
Adrian, you seem to be muted for some reason.
yeah, I've been muted. Yeah, I think we've all been muted. I did not come on. Yeah, the joys of Teams and Zoom, I must say. I'm looking forward to when we can all actually meet up in a sort of, anyway, in a more sort of conducive way. But so yes, I'm in terms of the shared values, it meant it was much easier to work with someone on the basis of trust, because trust is really important. And I think we've been doing this now for 20 odd years, actually, isn't it? Yeah. So from my perspective, it's opened my eyes up to what I could and should be doing more of. And I think from Jim's perspective, you can hear from him to let you know what his take on it is.
Thank you. Can I have the first slide, please, Sue? Yeah, this is just little pictures really to show what it's about, what I'm doing, been doing on Adrian's farm. So it is a different scale farming on the same land and to the same principles, I should add. In the top left gives an idea of scale, up to 1 hectare of bare land before we start planting. And it's just to strip up one of Adrian's fields. Like he says, he's managing 500 hectares organically. Normally 1 variety in 1 field when it's in crop. In that 1 hectare, we're growing 100, that turn from bare land to about 150 varieties of vegetables, herbs and flowers as shown below. We mix in cut flower production on a very small scale. And I just put a picture of me on the tractor there to give an idea of the difference in scale and the machinery. That's the largest bit of kit I use on the farm, on production there. It's an 18 horsepower tractor for mainly weeding, light seed bed at the finish and harvesting. Could I have the next slide, please? Which unfortunately isn't a pretty picture, but just to sort of paint a picture. That's, yes, since 2004, so for 18 years. And it did start from us being a small business that was trying to get going, but was struggling with problems with the tenancy, actually struggling with housing to run it there, and actually found a cottage to rent on Adrian's farm first. And so it sort of came from circumstances, our arrangement, rather than the type of excellent project you're trying to get going. And it was founded really on deciding that we trusted each other, and we chose not to use any legal documents or tenancy for flexibility and to keep costs down. And the central part of the arrangement is actually very different to what I've seen anywhere else for small growers, because the actual land we grow on moves to follow the farm rotation. I've seen share farming arrangements where perhaps 1 year in a rotation is taken by a vegetable producer, or fitting vegetables into arable rotations like Adrian did. But that all really involves putting a whole field over to one veg or a couple of veg. And the other model often seems found is where the land for horticulture is separated off from the rest of the farm, even though it can be integral to it, but it's not included in the same fertility building and cropping of the rest of the farm. And this arrangement, while quite unusual, has produced a number of benefits. And after 18 years of it, without any protected cropping, we are producing about 30 tonnes per year from this 1 hectare. Although I think of it in my head as 2 hectares, because Adrian's doing the fertility building, so it's actually using 2 hectares of land. And it's sold direct to about 200 households. We've got very good long-term consumer base and loyalty for regular weekly sales now. And a good enough business over that time that it supported my family, with me and my partner working on it, bringing up our son, and also strong enough to justify outside investment as we move on to a new plot nearby on 44 acres. And the business is strong enough to justify planning permission for a house as well as the facilities we're investing in. So it's worked well for us, and to show how the trust and arrangement has worked is actually moving to there isn't going to be the end of my cooperation with Adrian, because the land that's too big for us to do horticulture all on, certainly at the moment, is now have a share farming arrangement with Adrian on that land. That based on trust, I wouldn't say to anybody, don't consider legal documents, but I think that trust is absolutely essential. It's been based on all the way through.
Yeah.
And quite importantly for us, because we knew we were trying something other people were doing, is we wanted to build flexibility in it, if wanted to contract or expand the area that I was growing on. A big advantage is fertility as well, because with moving every 2 years to land that's straight out of clover, we don't have to design our own rotation for vegetables that maintains the fertility. We're actually just doing the exploitative cropping of the land. Adrian does all the hard work, the grazing, of raising the fertility of the land to enable sustainable food production. We just do a couple of years of producing on it. It does cooperation with other farmers and growers. I think it's important for survival and actually moving forward and doing well in the local food economy. And it's actually built into it, what we're doing. It also allows different scales of farming to work together and understand each other's issues. And for the small grower, it brings economies of scale that wouldn't be available otherwise. For ploughing a hectare and power harrowing, the kit Adrian uses for the bigger fields will get through that hectare quicker than I can sow a 50-metre by 6-metre patch of carrots. Perhaps not quicker than I can sow it, but certainly quicker than a single weeding on it. And it's brought diversity and rural employment by landowners taking these steps of cooperating with smaller growers. You're actually increasing the amount of skills that are available for other uses on your farm. For example, I came from horticulture and forestry previously, before I was running my own organic business, which meant I've been able to be a helping hand on a small orchard and with hedgerow planting, stuff like that for Adrian. Equally, if I came from a livestock background, experienced extra pair of hands at lambing or other times like that can always be handy. And it brings diversity to the farm. Even where we are on a cluster of organic farms next to a triple SI, having 1 hectare of vegetables and cut flowers in it has brought a different type of biodiversity, especially in butterfly numbers. I noticed actually the house martins that visit found they were using our plot as the training ground for their youngs when they've just, it's a lovely sight watching young house martins learning how to fly and how to forage and absolutely going mad just because the insect numbers immediately above the amount of flowering crops you're growing with vegetables. And wrens were actually using the flowers to raise their young in because of the structure you get as well as their single crop. And found hares in particular, like some of the field crops, the ground cover from squashes were excellent for them. This type of arrangement we've been developing, I think it's got a lot of scope for elsewhere. It has got its drawbacks of things that need more careful addressing than if you had, say, a fixed plot. And infrastructure is one of them. It's where do you want it? How do you do it? How do you deal with irrigation issues? That was fairly easy because I was trying to use a zero irrigation system, which was working on the heaviest soils here, but is breaking down now with climate change. I've realised I do have to adapt. With our hotter summers, I couldn't get away with it. So there are all those type of issues and local marketing. And I'd certainly be willing to talk to anybody and see if I can offer any thoughts or advice if they look to be going down this road, because it certainly worked very well for us, and I think it could for other people.
What is the optimum area needed? Does it need to rotate around the farm, or does it rotate within itself? And how is fertility maintained? FYM ? I wish I knew what FYM meant, but I'm too old and stupid. I just wonder whether, again, that maybe it comes back to something that Adrian and Jim were talking about, and whether you can quickly respond to that, gents.
Yes, I mean, the issue of scale is a question of market. And I think that it's very important not to grow anything speculatively. You know, we've all been there and done that. And I think obviously we'd love to see a really vibrant local food economy backed up through local processing hubs, and maybe using dynamic food procurement and local authorities actually looking to source, you know, local food to kind of give a leg up to the marketplace that's independent of mainstream retail. So in a sense, you know, the mechanisms, you know, routes to market are really critical in terms of growth. So, you know, Jim and Hayley worked really hard cultivating, you know, customers locally and through farmers markets and so on. You know, there's a danger of people working in competition with each other, and in particular years, some crops grow better than others. So then, you know, do you want to sell those at a loss, or, you know, so can you aggregate and sell into, or have those taken up by, say, school meals and things like this through more versatile menus. In terms of also in terms of the area, soil type is absolutely critical. Obviously, you know, what we have is a range of soil types on the farm, and so we tailor the soil types to what Jim is looking to grow, and obviously that's very, very important also. In terms of fertility, obviously, you know, we are using fertility powered, you know, solar power effectively in terms of clover fixing nitrogen through root nodules, P and K through livestock. Obviously, you know, we have a mixed farm and organic system. We have sheep and cattle. And in terms of moving around the farm following fertility, it does allow for that fertility to be in the form of well integrated, rather than sort of just, you know, spreading on farmyard manure and things like that, which haven't, you know, that's broken down that effectively, or might contain, you know, soil pathogens and things like that. So that's the way we're sort of viewing the fertility. And Jim might want to add something to that.
Yeah, I always think it's quite an important point that we don't, whichever bit of land we're growing on Adrian's farm, we're not actually needing to bring any fertility to it, either in the form of compost or in the form of farmyard manure. I know when I was first starting, before I moved here, I didn't want to be dealing with making huge amounts of compost, and was starting to think that the best way is to let the soil do it by growing legumes and giving the undisturbed soil for a year, 2 years chance for the soil life to do actually the work, building fertility and structure. Since I've been here, I've been even more convinced of that, because seeing standard horticultural rotations, which you say might have 1 or 2, 1 year in 4 or 2 years in 5 as a rest, where Adrian's got 3 solid years of fertility building before 3 years cropping. I don't need to think about which crop I grow in the first year or which in the second year after the fertility's turned in. The demanding horticultural crops like cauliflower, that all the horticultural advice is, get them straight after the clover's turned in, or get absolutely brilliant sort of football-sized results 2 years after the clover. It's that it's like really powerful battery, this especially cumulative over time, how long Adrian's done it for. And 1 year we even had to go into a 3rd year because of a really wet winter. 3rd year on the same place, again got good cauliflower off it. So occasionally things like squash from having a slightly too high nitrogen to potassium ratio in the soil because of what the clover's done. But it just takes all the hard work out of raising fertility, because ultimately it all does come from the legumes we grow and the soil life. Livestock only manage it, and composting or spreading manure, it's all having to move it about. We don't move it and we don't buy any fertility, and it works really well.